Hey guys, OG of HRC here, and I bet you have an idea of what we're going to talk about today. The robe, the dissent collar, the earrings, the gavel. Yes, we're going to be talking about the Supreme Court, but we're not going to be talking about the Supreme Court and what you guys think I'm going to be talking about the Supreme Court. I'm sure you guys think I'm going to be talking about how there's only been 4 women justices in the history of the Supreme Court, and how important it is to have representation of women on this most important court of all. No, I'm going to save that for another day. Today, we're going to be talking about how the Supreme Court has somehow in the last 30 years managed to turn into a legislative branch of the United States government. Let's talk about it. Okay, so if I were to ask you guys, what is it that the Supreme Court does? What would you say? Would you say that they make laws? Would you say that they verify laws, that they create laws? What is it that you think that they actually do? Really think about it. Well, it's simple. All their job is to interpret the law and how it is interpreted in terms of the Constitution. That's it. These are men and women who've spent their entire careers analyzing the law, defending the law. They've been lawyers, they've been many of them judges, federal judges, justices, and now they've made it all the way to the Supreme Court. Their job is to interpret the law and how it is according to the Constitution. Now, many justices are actual interpretation of the Constitution. Many justices are interpretation of today and what our forefathers would have meant today. It varies. But that's their job. That's it. Has nothing to do with writing law, pursuing law, nothing. It's just an interpretation of how they see it. Now, back 30, 40, 50 years ago, the Supreme Court used to only hear from cases that were these massive cases, like Brown versus the Board of Education and desegregating schools, or Roe v. Wade, women's right to choose. These life-altering cases that changed the course of our country. Now, they have had some large cases. Gay marriage, of course, a few years back was seen as it was unconstitutional to say that 2 men or 2 women couldn't marry. Love is love. It's law of the land now. Amazing.
And you see a fairly predictable pushback from the 4 more conservative members of the court saying that it's fine with us if legislatures want to extend this right to same-sex couples, but this is not the judiciary's work to do. And Chief Justice Roberts, in the main dissent, even went so far as to say, look, if you're in favor of gay marriage, terrific, celebrate today. In a very expansive sense, he said it's a wonderful day for you, but don't celebrate the Constitution, because the Constitution should not have accomplished this. This was a task for democracy to accomplish, for lawmakers.
But time after time, I've seen in the last 30 years, this transition from being just a judicial branch, a judicial system, to a legislative system. And why I think I've seen that is because legislators, to me, over the last 30 years, have gotten lazy. We've gotten further and further away from bipartisan agreements, and more partisanship has overtaken. That really happened in the 90s when it started with Bill Clinton, and it's just progressively gotten worse.
It is not in my hands. It is in the hands of Congress and the people of this country.
I've asked every Democratic member in these last days, I have asked every member to search their heart and their conscience and to vote for what in their heart and their mind and their conscience they think is right. And I come to the floor today to ask every Republican member to do the same.
And so I think that has a lot to do with why there's been more pressure on the Supreme Court to legislate our country. But that's not what they're supposed to be doing. There's so many smaller cases now that come into their court and they hear them. So prime example is in 2008, there was the Lilly Ledbetter case that was made it all the way to the Supreme Court, where she worked for a tire company and she found out that she was making quite a bit less than the man next to her, and they had the exact same job. So she took that case to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court did not vote in her favor. RBG wrote the dissent and basically punted it back to the Congress and said, do your job, legislate equal pay. And they had a little bit of a turn, but still women don't make as much as men. But she had to punt it back to say, like, why don't you guys just do your job? In my interpretation, that's what she said, or with thinking, or, and she couldn't be any more correct. Why can't legislators just do their job? I mean, you think about the women's movement in the 1800s, Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Stanton, they wanted the women's the right to vote, and it wasn't passed until 1919, and it was ratified, and it was state by state, and you were on trains, and it was pre-air conditioning, and they got it passed, and it was ratified, and it was made law, and there's an amendment for the women to have the right to vote. And that's how it's done. Legislators legislated. They voted and they legislated. It wasn't on the Supreme Court. It wasn't a Supreme Court decision. They did it the old-fashioned way, the legislating way. I mean, we have three branches of our government: the executive, the legislature, and the judicial. So, of course, the executive is the president, the Oval Office. The legislators, of course, is Congress, the House, and the Senate. And judicial is the Supreme Court, the highest court of the land. They all kind of balance each other. One's not supposed to be overworking because the other side. So right now we've got the judicial balance doing this and legislative doing this. Prime example of that is a few years back, Citizens United. So here's something that most people need to understand about the Supreme Court and their decisions and how important these decisions are. If something is made a Supreme Court decision, like Citizens United, a president cannot veto on his first day Citizens United. I know that's a rumor that's been going around, but you can't. A Supreme Court decision has to be overturned by the Supreme Court. That's just how it works, which is why something like Roe v. Wade, it's so important for conservatives to have conservative justices, because they want to overturn Roe v. Wade according to the Supreme Court. It was a Supreme Court decision, so therefore it can only be overturned by a Supreme Court. It's that simple. So something like Citizens United should have never been at the Supreme Court. Citizens United basically says that corporations are people, and therefore they can give as much money as they want to politicians, and they don't have to disclose anything. What? First of all, why is that even a Supreme Court decision? That's just insanity to me, that the legislators couldn't have passed legislation prior to this saying corporations are not people, Koch brothers, and on and on. And no, you have to disclose how much money. But they didn't do their job. So Citizens United slid by during the W. Bush administration. And Roberts, everyone's new liberal, not so liberal hero, he passed it. And he wrote this big blistering opinion about how great it was, the decision. He's also the guy behind gutting the Voting Rights Act. The gutting of the Voting Rights Act shapes our entire democracy. The fact that Atlanta has 2 polling spots for the entire city of Atlanta is simply because of that decision, that Supreme Court decision. So these things matter, but more and more we are seeing these smaller cases that should not be discussed even in the Supreme Court. They should be discussed in legislative branches. Another great example is Trump ran on a campaign of, I'm going to repeal Obamacare within my first, I think he said 60 days. He had full power. He had the House, he had the Senate, and he had the White House. Now, to me, Republicans had about 8 years of complaining about Obamacare, and yet when they finally won and they had full power, they couldn't repeal it. And it was much bigger than McCain's, of course, classic moment. It was they didn't have a plan for life after Obamacare. You have 8 years and you don't have a plan for life after Obamacare? Okay, he didn't get it repealed. So instead of trying to legislate it and fix it, which he still has control of the Senate, what does he do? He wants to send it to the Supreme Court. He sent a lot of cases in the last 3.5 years to the Supreme Court, as did W. Bush, and I think Obama did a handful of times. That's not how you get things done in the country. One, because it's mighty scary when a Supreme Court decision happens, because it can, again, only be overturned by the Supreme Court. Citizens United, reversing the Voting Rights Act, Roe v. Wade, Brown versus the Board of It, all have to be decided by the Supreme Court. Again, legislators can gut away at it, which conservatives have gotten really good at gutting away at Roe v. Wade without getting close enough to interpret too far. So it's wild to me, and it's also another reason why Mitch McConnell has made it his life mission to get as many federal judges, because those are lifetime appointments, in our current court system, our federal court system, because they move up the ladder and they become justices and they control the courts, and the manipulation of our Supreme Court has run rampant. Now, both sides are doing it, in my opinion. Both sides are guilty of using and abusing the Supreme Court to get what they want because they just don't want to legislate. The way that I see it, we hire legislators to represent us in Washington, D.C. We hire our House members and we hire our senators to represent us, to represent our whole state and our whole district. It's their job to go there and work as hard as possible to represent us. The Supreme Court doesn't represent us, by the way. The Supreme Court is handpicked by whomever the President of the United States is and confirmed by the Senate. Now, yes, you can say senators represent us with the vote. I agree in that content. But we don't really have a say. I mean, as we all saw with the Kavanaugh, at the end of the day, if the votes aren't there and our senator votes no or votes, we don't have a say. And never in the history of our country has the Senate never approved a justice, by the way. So really, like, that breakdown, it used to be so that things were so bipartisan, like Ruth Bader Ginsburg, she got approved by the Senate 98-2. That could never happen in today's era, which is why we've gone from a bipartisan government to a massively partisan government, and we rely a massive amount of time and effort in our Supreme Court. And these are people who do not represent us. They are picked by whomever the president is, and they are sitting there for as long as they want to. There is no term limits on them. See, unlike legislative branch, we get to decide every 2 to 4 years whether or not 4 or 6 years if we want them. We don't get to do that with justices. Once they've confirmed in, that's it. And they decide legislation that affects us. They shouldn't be affecting our legislation. They should be affecting massive cases that are an interpretation of the Constitution. That's it. That's what our forefathers wanted with the Supreme Court. Those are the cases that they wanted to hear. You know, the case of W. Bush v. Gore, right? That was a massive case. Don't get me started on that case because it's amazing how Scalia, he was a states' right justice up until that case, and then all of a sudden states' right don't matter. But I digress. So the point being is it's very simple. The Supreme Court needs to be our judicial branch, and the legislative branch needs to be our legislative branch, and our executive branch needs to be the executive branch. It's just that simple. There's a reason why there's this great balance. And I feel like as a society, we no longer hold our legislators responsible, but we always hold the Supreme Court responsible. When at the end of the day, a conservative justice is going to vote like a conservative justice. A liberal justice is going to vote like a liberal justice. They don't represent us. They represent the Constitution. Get mad at the legislators who didn't do something to stop these things from happening prior, who didn't shout from the rooftops, Citizens United cannot pass, this is crazy. No one did that. It went to the Supreme Court, and we lost as Americans, we lost. So the Supreme Court has turned into a legislative branch. It's just that simple. Now, again, to be fair, we have had some amazing moments with the Supreme Court, some surprising moments, but I just want to leave off with this to everyone. One, do not trust Justice Roberts, Chief Justice Roberts. I'm sorry. I'm speaking from my heart. He's the guy behind Citizens United. He's the guy behind gutting the Voting Rights Act. He was handpicked by W. Bush, and I'm sorry. Anything associated with W. Bush, in my mind, still to this day, is dirty and tarnished. Don't trust him. He is a massive pro-life guy, and the only reason that he voted in the Louisiana case is because he has a bigger picture of his vision of how to take on Roe v. Wade. Hence, he decided in the conservative way, and that religious corporations have a right to say, we're not going to pay for your contraceptive, aka birth control. So this guy is not trustworthy. So I say that to everyone. Two, everyone should really pay attention to the brackets of the Supreme Court. It's very easy to get online. These decisions that are being made, again, because they can only be overturned by the Supreme Court, are massive. And I feel like if they're going to legislate, which I don't see this stopping anytime soon, then we as Americans need to understand what's going on. So therefore we can hold our legislators accountable before it gets to the Supreme Court. You know, it should be a big deal that Obamacare may be overturned because of a Supreme Court decision when there's no replacement. There's no legislative waiting in the wings. So then what? What are we supposed to do then? I am not the biggest fan of Obamacare for a lot of reasons, but I feel like for right now, this is what we have and we need to fix it. So instead of sending it to the Supreme Court, let's fix it. But it's out of our hands now. It's literally in the bracket of the Supreme Court. Number 3, I just want to say this about Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I have to add this in because she is one of my role models in life, without a doubt.
Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the notorious RBG, a pop culture icon. A complicated figure, a Supreme Court justice who became an unlikely celebrity.
I am nearly 84 years old and everyone wants to take a picture with me.
I just want to say RBG will retire whenever she wants to retire. If I have to hear from one more person about how she should have retired when Obama sort of suggested she retired in 2016, or which, by the way, who knows if she would have even been replaced because we had the debacle, of course, of Garland and Mitch McConnell holding that seat hostage. So good luck with that. But also, this woman has given everything to this country, and she has done it quietly than most, but she has made decisions and gotten laws overturned and passed that affect each and every one of us, whether you're a woman or a man. And it's not just about women's right to choose or just about equality. And that woman, if she wants to stay on the court until she's 95 years old and she can still coherently do her job, let her do her job. Her dissents and her opinions, by the way, are a million times better than most of those justices. And yes, she's in her 80s. So let RBG be RBG. And I always have faith and trust whenever I get an update about her that she's going to be all right. I honestly believe that she is fighting tooth and nail to make sure that her seat is replaced by someone that is of equal caliber as her. So trust her. She's never let us down, ever, ever in the history of all that is RBG. She has never let us down. So please keep your opinion about that to yourself because she deserves a lot better than that. Also, I will say this to the 4 women justices, you are also all rock stars. You are all also leaders. And please, women, especially women, I'm speaking to you, know their names. Sandra Day O'Connor was, yes, the first woman justice picked by Ronald Reagan. Then came RBG, picked by Bill Clinton. Thank you, Bill, for her. Thank you so much. And I thank her deceased husband who fought so hard for her. Find your alma mater, you guys. Sonia Sotomayor and Elena Kagan, picked by Barack Obama. So they are warriors, they are heroes. I read their dissents, I read their opinions, I value what they have to say. And I love that RBG one time was asked, when will there be enough women on the court? And she said, when there are 9. And people sort of laughed. And she goes, what? There's been 9 male justices and there was never a question. That is why I love RBG. That is why I am all about her every day, all day. And I pray for her every day, all day. All right, guys, I hope that you have learned something about our Supreme Court and the legislative branch and the executive branch and the judicial branch, which I feel like you guys should all know as well. But that being said, I hope you've learned something. I hope you had some fun here. Of course, till next time, make sure you check us out on iTunes, Spotify, and of course right here on YouTube. And please push that little subscribe button. We'll love you forever for it. Until next time, this is the OG of HRC, signing out.